The air in Westminster Abbey was thick with anticipation. Hundreds of guests sat in perfect silence, their eyes fixed on the altar where history was unfolding. Outside, millions watched on screens across the world. Inside, two children sat motionless in the front row, their small bodies rigid with the weight of royal expectation. Prince George, 10 years old, wore a miniature naval uniform that mirrored his father's. His younger sister, Princess Charlotte, sat beside him in a pale blue dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap. They had been sitting for nearly an hour. The ancient stone walls of the abbey seemed to press down on them. Heavy with centuries of tradition, Queen Camilla stood near the altar, her face a mask of royal composure. But her eyes were sharp, watching everything, missing nothing. The coronation ceremony demanded perfection. Every movement, every gesture had been rehearsed 100 times. There was no room for mistakes. Not today. Not with the world watching. George shifted slightly in his seat. It was barely a movement, just a small adjustment of his leg. But in the suffocating silence of the abbey, it felt enormous. Charlotte glanced at him, her blue eyes wide with concern. She knew what their parents had told them. Sit still. Don't move. Don't fidget. Represent the crown with dignity. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what happens next. The Archbishop's voice echoed through the vaulted ceiling, speaking words that had been spoken for 1,000 years. George tried to focus, but his leg was falling asleep. A tingling sensation crept up from his foot, uncomfortable and distracting. He shifted again, more noticeably this time. From across the aisle, Camilla's gaze locked onto him. Her expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes. A warning. A command. George froze. His heart began to pound in his small chest. He had been caught. Charlotte saw it too. She saw the way Camilla's jaw tightened, the way her head tilted just slightly in their direction. The queen consort's face remained pleasant for the cameras, but there was steel beneath the surface. The children had been taught to read these signals since they were old enough to walk. A look could mean more than 1,000 words. George tried to sit even straighter, but his body betrayed him. His hands fidgeted with the gold buttons on his uniform. He couldn't help it. The ceremony felt endless. Every minute stretched into an eternity. Charlotte wanted to reach over and still his hands, but she didn't dare move. Any motion now would draw more attention than had happened. George's hand slipped, and one of the buttons made a soft clicking sound against the wooden pew. In the vast silence of Westminster Abbey, it sounded like a gunshot. Camilla's head turned fully toward them now. Her smile remained fixed for the guests, but her eyes told a different story. She took one step in their direction, her elaborate gown rustling against the stone floor. The children felt their stomachs drop. She was coming toward them. In the middle of the coronation, in front of everyone, the cameras were still rolling. The world was still watching, and something was about to happen that no one had planned for. Catherine, Princess of Wales, saw it unfold in slow motion. She was seated 3 rows behind her children. It's close enough to see the tension in their small shoulders, but too far to intervene. Her hands gripped the edge of her seat as she watched Camilla move toward George and Charlotte. William sat beside her, his face carefully neutral, but she felt his body stiffen. The Archbishop continued speaking, unaware of the silent drama unfolding just feet away. The choir's voices rose in a solemn hymn, filling the abbey with sound, but Catherine heard none of it. Her entire focus was on her children and the queen consort approaching them with deliberate steps. Camilla reached the children's pew. She leaned down, her face still composed, still camera-ready, but her lips moved, forming words meant only for George and Charlotte. The children couldn't hear her over the music at first. She leaned closer. "Sit properly," Camilla whispered, her voice sharp despite its quietness. "You are embarrassing your family. The world is watching you. Act like royals, not like common children." George's face drained of color. He was 10 years old, trying his best, but the words cut through him like ice. Charlotte's eyes began to fill with tears, but she blinked them back furiously. She had been trained never to cry in public, never to show weakness, but the shame burned in her chest like fire. Camilla straightened, satisfied that her message had been delivered. She returned to her position, her expression serene, as if nothing had happened. To most observers, it looked like she had simply checked on the children, a caring gesture from a grandmother figure. But George and Charlotte knew better. They sat, frozen now, terrified to even breathe wrong. Catherine's jaw clenched. She had seen the way her children's faces changed, the way Charlotte's shoulders trembled slightly. She knew that look. She had worn it herself many times in the early years of her royal life. The look of a child being scolded, being told they weren't good enough, weren't royal enough. William placed a hand on Catherine's arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. They couldn't react. Not here. Not now. The cameras would catch everything. Any sign of family tension would become tomorrow's headlines. They had to maintain the facade of unity, no matter what happened behind closed doors. But something was building inside Catherine. A mother's instinct, fierce and protective. Her children had been sitting perfectly for over an hour in uncomfortable formal wear. Under unbearable pressure, watched by millions, they were children. They were doing their best. And it wasn't enough for Camilla. The ceremony continued. The crown was placed. The oaths were spoken. The trumpets sounded. Through it all, George and Charlotte sat like statues, not daring to move a muscle. The joy had drained from their faces. They looked like small soldiers in a war they hadn't chosen to fight. When the ceremony finally ended and the procession began, Catherine moved quickly. She reached her children before anyone else could. She knelt beside them, her hand gentle on Charlotte's back. "You did beautifully," she whispered. "I'm so proud of both of you." Charlotte's lip trembled. "But we moved. We fidgeted. You were perfect," Catherine said firmly, her eyes meeting George's. "You sat with dignity for over an hour. You represented your family with grace. And your only children. Anyone who expects more than that is being unreasonable." George wanted to believe her, but Camilla's words still echoed in his mind. Common children. Embarrassing your family. He had tried so hard, and it hadn't been enough. As they filed out of the abbey into the blinding sunlight, Catherine made a decision. This wasn't over. Someone needed to address what had happened, and if no one else would stand up for her children, she would. The reception at Buckingham Palace was a carefully choreographed display of royal elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over hundreds of guests in formal attire. Waiters moved silently between conversations, offering champagne and delicate canapes. Somewhere, a string quartet played. The room hummed with polite conversation and restrained laughter. Catherine stood near a tall window, watching George and Charlotte. They had changed into slightly less formal clothes, but their spirits hadn't lifted. George stood beside his father, his face serious beyond his years. Charlotte stayed close to her mother, quieter than usual. The light had gone out of their eyes. Across the room, Camilla held court among a circle of dignitaries. She was radiant in her coronation gown, every inch the queen consort. She laughed at someone's joke, her head tilted gracefully. She seemed to have forgotten the children entirely, or perhaps she thought the matter was settled. A small correction, nothing more. But Catherine hadn't forgotten. Every time she looked at her daughter's subdued expression, every time she saw her son's forced smile, the anger grew stronger. These were her children. They had done nothing wrong. They had done everything asked of them, and more. William appeared at her side, 2 glasses in his hands. He offered her one. "They'll be fine," he said quietly. "Children are resilient." Catherine took the glass but didn't drink. "She humiliated them," she said, keeping her voice low. "In front of everyone? During one of the most important ceremonies of their lives." "I know," William said. His jaw tightened. "But what do you want me to do? Start a family war at my father's coronation reception?" "I want you to protect your children," Catherine said, her eyes meeting his. "I want you to tell her that what she did was inappropriate." William looked torn. Catherine could see the conflict in his face. He was the heir to the throne now, second in line to his father. He couldn't afford family drama. He had to think about the monarchy, about tradition, about keeping peace. But he was also a father. Before he could respond, King Charles approached them, resplendent in his formal robes. His face was flushed with happiness, the weight of the crown still fresh on his head. "There you are," he said warmly. "Marvelous day, wasn't it?" The children were exemplary. Absolutely exemplary. Catherine seized the moment. "They were," she agreed, "which is why it was unnecessary for them to be reprimanded during the ceremony." Charles's smile faltered slightly. "Reprimanded? What do you mean?" "Camilla spoke to them during the service," Catherine said carefully. "She told them they were embarrassing the family, that they were acting like common children." The color in Charles's face changed. His eyes darted across the room to where Camilla stood. "I'm sure it was just a gentle reminder," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. She was probably just nervous. "The pressure of the day, they're 10 and 8 years old," Catherine interrupted, her voice still quiet but firm. They sat perfectly still for over an hour, in uncomfortable formal wear, under the scrutiny of millions of people. They fidgeted for perhaps 30 seconds, and they were shamed for it. William put a hand on her arm, a warning to tread carefully. But Catherine had already decided. Her children's well-being mattered more than protocol. More than peace, more than preserving appearances. Charles looked uncomfortable. He glanced at William, seeking support, but William's face was unreadable. "Catherine, I understand you're upset," Charles began. "But perhaps this isn't the time, then." "When is the time?" Catherine asked. "When my children are too afraid to attend royal functions? When they develop anxiety about every public appearance? When they believe they're never good enough?" Nearby guests were beginning to notice the tension. Conversations quieted. Heads turned subtly in their direction. Catherine realized she was raising her voice. She took a breath, steadying herself. Charles looked genuinely distressed now. "I'll speak with her," he said quietly. "I promise. But please, not here, not now. Let's get through today." Catherine nodded slowly. But as she looked across the room at Camilla, still laughing with her circle of admirers, she knew Charles's gentle conversation wouldn't be enough. Something more needed to happen. Someone needed to make it clear that the children weren't fair targets for criticism. That being royal didn't mean accepting cruelty as normal. And then Charlotte tugged on her sleeve. "Mummy," she whispered, "can we go home now, please?" Catherine looked down at her daughter's pleading eyes, and her heart broke a little. This was supposed to be a day of celebration. Instead, it had become a day her children would remember with shame and fear. The photographers were relentless outside the palace. Camera flashes exploded like lightning as the royal family emerged onto the balcony for the traditional flyover. George and Charlotte stood between their parents, small figures in a line of adults. The crowd below roared with approval, thousands of voices blending into a single sound of celebration. Catherine felt Charlotte press closer against her side. The little girl was smiling for the cameras, but her hand gripped her mother's dress tightly. George stood straight, his face composed, but Catherine could see the tension in his shoulders. They were performing. That's what royal life had become for them. A constant performance. The planes roared overhead, leaving trails of red, white, and blue across the London sky. The crowd cheered louder. Camilla stood on the other side of the king, waving gracefully, her smile perfect. She looked every bit the queen, confident, composed, untouchable. Catherine made a decision in that moment. The roar of the jets fading and the cameras still flashing below. She wasn't going to wait for Charles to handle this gently. She wasn't going to let this moment pass into history without addressing what had happened. Her children deserved better. They deserved an advocate after the balcony appearance. As the family retreated back into the palace, Catherine caught Camilla's arm. "May I have a word?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. Camilla turned, surprise flickering across her face. "Of course, dear. What is it?" Catherine glanced at William, who gave her a small nod. He would take the children. She guided Camilla toward a private sitting room, away from the reception, away from the guests. The room was quiet, decorated in cream and gold. With portraits of past monarchs watching from the walls, Camilla settled into a chair, her coronation gown spreading around her like water. "This is about the children, I assume," she said, not waiting for Catherine to begin. Catherine, they needed correction. "You can't let them fidget and squirm during important ceremonies. It reflects poorly on all of us." Catherine remained standing. "They're children," she said simply. "They sat perfectly for over an hour. They did everything we asked of them. And you shamed them in the middle of Westminster Abbey." "I spoke quietly," Camilla said, her voice cooling. "No one else heard." "They heard," Catherine said, "and that's what matters." George's face went white. Charlotte almost cried. "You told them they were embarrassing the family. You called them common." Camilla's expression hardened. "I said they were acting like common children. There's a difference. They need to understand the standards expected of them. You and William are too soft. You treat them like ordinary children when they're anything but." Catherine felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "They are children. Yes, they're royal. Yes, they have responsibilities. But they're also human beings with feelings and limitations. They don't deserve to be spoken to like that." "You're overreacting," Camilla said, standing now. "A small correction is not abuse. I'm trying to help them succeed in this life. You should be grateful someone is willing to teach them." Properly, the words hit Catherine like a slap. Grateful, as if Camilla had done them a favor by humiliating two young children during one of the most stressful days of their lives. "Am their mother," Catherine said, her voice quiet but carrying an edge of steel. "I decide what they need, not you. And what they need is patience, understanding, and support. Not criticism and shame." Camilla's eyes flashed. "You're still new to this, Catherine. You don't fully understand what it takes to survive in this family. I'm trying to prepare them for a reality you seem determined to shelter them from. I'm trying to protect them from becoming miserable." Catherine shot back. "I've watched what this family does to people. The pressure, the criticism, the impossible standards. I won't let my children be broken by it." For a moment, neither woman spoke. The air between them crackled with tension. Camilla's face was flushed now, her composure cracking. Catherine stood her ground, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. "This conversation is over," Camilla said finally. "You're being emotional and unreasonable. When you've calmed down, perhaps you'll see that I was only trying to help." She moved toward the door, but Catherine stepped into her path. "It's not over," Catherine said. "You need to apologize to them," Camilla laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Apologize? 2 children? For teaching them discipline?" "For hurting them," Catherine said. "For making them feel small and inadequate when they were doing their absolute best. If you can't see why that requires an apology, then I question your understanding of what it means to care for children." Camilla's face went cold. "Be very careful how you speak to me, Catherine. I am the queen consort. I will not be lectured." By the door opened suddenly. William stood in the doorway, his face pale. Behind him was King Charles, looking distressed. They had clearly heard raised voices. The tension in the room was suffocating. Charles closed the door behind him, shutting out the sounds of the reception. William moved to stand beside Catherine, a silent show of support. His presence steadied her, reminded her she wasn't alone in this. "What's going on here?" Charles asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. His eyes moved between his wife and his daughter-in-law, seeing the anger in both their faces. "Catherine is upset about a minor incident during the ceremony," Camilla said, her voice regaining its composure. "I gave the children a small reminder about their behavior, and apparently that was unacceptable." "It wasn't a small reminder," Catherine said, looking at Charles directly. "She told them they were embarrassing the family. She made them feel like failures on what should have been a proud day for them." Charles rubbed his forehead, looking suddenly exhausted. The crown was gone, but the weight of his position seemed heavier than ever. "Camilla," he said quietly, "what exactly did you say to them?" Camilla hesitated. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. "I told them to sit properly. To act like royals?" They were fidgeting, Charles. During the coronation, the cameras were on them. "They're children," William said, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm but firm. "They sat perfectly for over an hour. A few moments of fidgeting is completely normal. It's actually remarkable they managed as well as they did. Your father never would have tolerated such behavior," Camilla said to William. "Standards have slipped. Someone needs to maintain them." The mention of Diana hung in the air like smoke. William's face darkened. Catherine felt him tense beside her. That was a line Camilla shouldn't have crossed. My mother, William said carefully, would never have spoken to us the way you spoke to George and Charlotte today. She understood that children need encouragement, not constant criticism. Charles held up his hands. Please, everyone, this is my coronation day. Can we not do this now? Then when? Catherine asked, echoing her earlier question. When do we address the fact that your wife thinks it's appropriate to shame children in public? When do we establish boundaries about how our children are treated? Camilla's face flushed red. I am not the villain here. I was trying to help. You're twisting this into something it wasn't. I saw their faces, Catherine said. I saw how they shut down. How they stopped being children and became terrified little statues. That's not helping them. That's hurting them. Charles looked at his wife, really looked at her. Something passed between them, a silent communication built on years of marriage. Camilla, he said gently, perhaps you were a bit harsh. Camilla's mouth opened, then closed. She looked betrayed. Charles, you're taking her side? I'm not taking sides, Charles said. But I saw the children afterward. They were upset. And if what Catherine says is true, if you use those words... He paused, choosing carefully. Then, perhaps an apology is warranted. The word hung in the air. Apology. Camilla looked as if she'd been asked to perform an impossible task. Queens didn't apologize, especially not to children. I won't apologize for maintaining standards, Camilla said, her voice tight. If that makes me the villain in this family, so be it. She turned toward the door, but Charles caught her hand. Wait, he said. Please. Just wait. Camilla stopped, but didn't turn around. Her back was rigid, her pride clearly wounded. Catherine felt a strange mixture of victory and sadness. She hadn't wanted this confrontation. She hadn't wanted to create this rift. But her children came first. They had two. Perhaps we could all take a moment, Charles suggested. Cool down. Think about this from each other's perspectives. This is a family matter. We can resolve it as a family. With respect, Father, William said. This isn't about compromise. Our children were hurt. An acknowledgement of that is the bare minimum we're asking for. Charles looked pained. He was trying to keep everyone happy, trying to maintain peace, but some situations didn't allow for middle ground. Someone had to be wrong. Someone had to bend. Camilla finally turned around. Her eyes were bright, whether with anger or tears, Catherine couldn't tell. Fine, she said, her voice clipped. I'll speak to them. I'll explain that royal life requires discipline and that they need to do better. Will that satisfy you? No, Catherine said firmly. That's not an apology. That's another criticism disguised as an explanation. The two women stared at each other across the beautiful room, neither willing to yield. William and Charles stood between them, looking helpless. Outside, the reception continued. Guests laughed and celebrated, unaware of the battle happening behind closed doors. Then, unexpectedly, there was a soft knock at the door. Before anyone could respond, it opened slightly. George stood in the doorway, still in his formal clothes, his face serious. Excuse me, he said quietly, but Granny Camilla, I wanted to tell you something. Everyone froze. The adults stared at the small boy who had walked into the middle of a war zone. George walked into the room with careful steps, his hands clasped in front of him. Behind him, Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide and uncertain. Catherine's heart lurched. The children weren't supposed to be part of this. She had been trying to shield them from the adult conflict. George, darling, this isn't, Catherine began, but George held up a small hand. Mummy, he said. I need to say this. He turned to Camilla, who looked down at him with an expression Catherine couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly. Perhaps a touch of guilt. The boy took a breath, gathering courage that seemed too large for his small frame. Granny Camilla, he said, his voice steady despite the adults watching him. I'm sorry I fidgeted during the ceremony. I was trying very hard to sit still, but my leg hurt and I couldn't help it. I didn't mean to embarrass anyone. I know it was an important day. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. Her son was apologizing. Her brave, kind son was taking responsibility for something that wasn't his fault. Trying to make peace in a situation adults had created, Camilla's face changed. The hardness softened. She looked at George, really looked at him, and seemed to see him properly for the first time that day. Not a royal child who had misbehaved, just a child who had tried his best. Charlotte stepped forward too, her voice smaller than her brother's. "I'm sorry too," she said. "We really did try. It was just very long, and we got tired." Camilla knelt down, her elaborate gown pooling around her. She was at eye level with the children now. When she spoke, her voice was different, gentler, real. "No," she said quietly. "No, my dears, you shouldn't apologize. I should." The room seemed to hold its breath. Catherine saw Charles's eyes widen slightly. William stood perfectly still, watching. Camilla took both children's hands. "I was wrong," she said, and the words seemed to cost her something. "I spoke harshly to you during the ceremony. I was nervous and worried about everything being perfect, but that's not an excuse. You both did beautifully today. You sat with such dignity and patience. I should have told you that instead of criticizing you." George's eyes searched her face, looking for sincerity. "You're not angry with us?" "I'm angry with myself," Camilla said, "for forgetting that you're children, for expecting you to be perfect when I should have been proud of your effort. Can you forgive me?" Charlotte nodded immediately, the weight visibly lifting from her small shoulders. George hesitated a moment longer, then nodded too. "Yes," he said. "We forgive you." Camilla pulled them both into a gentle embrace. Over their heads, her eyes met Catherine's. There was no triumph in that look, no victory, just exhaustion and perhaps a grudging respect. They were both trying to navigate impossible waters, both trying to protect what mattered to them. When Camilla released the children, Catherine knelt beside them. "Why don't you two go find some cake?" she suggested. "I think you've earned about 5 pieces each today." The children giggled, the sound like sunshine breaking through clouds. They ran off, hand in hand, their spirits restored. The adults remained in the quiet room, processing what had just happened. Charles was the first to speak. "That," he said softly, "took courage, Camilla." She stood slowly, brushing down her dress. "I meant what I said. To them and to you." She looked at Catherine. "I do want them to succeed, to thrive in this life, but perhaps I've forgotten what it's like to be young, to be learning, to make mistakes." "They will make mistakes," Catherine said. "We all do. But they need to know they're loved and supported through those mistakes, not punished for being human." Camilla nodded slowly. "I can't promise I'll always get it right. This life, this role, it demands so much. Sometimes I forget there's room for softness." "There has to be room for softness," William said. "Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? We're supposed to be a family, not just an institution." The 4 of them stood together in that beautiful room, surrounded by centuries of royal history, each carrying their own burdens and hopes. They had come close to a breaking point, but the innocence and courage of 2 children had pulled them back from the edge. "Shall we rejoin the reception?" Charles suggested. "Present a united front." They walked back together, not quite relaxed, but no longer at war. In the grand reception hall, George and Charlotte were indeed eating cake. Chocolate smeared on Charlotte's nose, and George, explaining something animatedly to his younger brother Louis. They looked like children again. Happy, carefree children. Catherine felt William's hand find hers. She squeezed it gratefully. They had fought for their children today. They had drawn a line, established a boundary. It wouldn't be the last battle in the complicated dance of royal family life. But it was an important one. Camilla approached the children with 2 more plates of cake. George looked up at her warily, but when she smiled, a real smile, he smiled back. The moment wasn't perfect. The wounds would take time to fully heal. Trust would need to be rebuilt brick by brick. But it was a start, a genuine start, as the afternoon light slanted through the palace windows and the reception continued around them. Catherine allowed herself to hope. Hope that her children could grow up royal without losing their humanity. Hope that love could exist alongside duty. Hope that even in a family as complicated and visible as theirs, there was room for understanding, forgiveness, and growth. The coronation day would be remembered by the world as a grand ceremony, a perfect display of British pageantry. But for one family, it would be remembered as the day they almost broke apart and the moment too brave. Children showed them how to come back together. George took another bite of cake and looked at his mother. She was watching him with such love in her eyes that he felt warm all over. He didn't fully understand everything that had happened today, but he knew one thing for certain. His parents would always fight for him, and that made everything else bearable.